Nobody told Eleanor Ashworth that the Duke's manor had two entrances, one for guests, one for servants. She had walked through the wrong one, or so they wanted her to believe. Eleanor had spent 3 weeks preparing for this day. She had pressed her best traveling dress herself, deep blue wool, modest but clean, the kind of dress that said, "I am not wealthy, but I have dignity." She had rehearsed her curtsy in her mother's small bedroom mirror. She had read everything she could find about the Harwick family, their history, their titles, their land. She thought she was ready. But nothing in those books had mentioned Lord Harwick Sr. The carriage rolled through the iron gates of Harwick Manor just after noon. Eleanor pressed her face slightly toward the window, not enough to seem eager, just enough to see. And what she saw made her breath catch. The manor was enormous. Gray stone, ivy-covered walls, windows so tall they looked like they belonged in a cathedral. The ground stretched in every direction. Manicured hedges, a fountain, a long gravel path lined with bare autumn trees. It was beautiful. It was also deeply, quietly cold. Her mother had squeezed her hand when they passed the gates. "Remember who you are," her mother had whispered. Eleanor had nodded. She remembered. She was Eleanor Ashworth, daughter of Mr. George Ashworth, a man of modest means but excellent reputation. She was 22 years old. She read Latin. She spoke French. She kept her own household accounts. She was not nobility, but she was not nothing. The carriage stopped. A footman opened the door, and standing at the top of the front steps, tall, dark-coated, composed, was James Harwick, Duke of Blackmore. Eleanor had expected coldness. That was what people said about the Duke. Distant, formal, not the kind of man who smiles easily. But when she stepped out of the carriage and looked up at him, the first thing she noticed was that he was watching her with genuine attention, not judgment, not boredom, attention. He came down the steps himself. That surprised her. She had expected a butler, a greeting from a distance, perhaps a brief nod. Instead, he walked down all 12 steps and stopped 2 feet in front of her. "Miss Ashworth," he said. His voice was low, measured. "Welcome to Harwick Manor." He bowed, properly, not the half gesture men sometimes offered women of lower station, a real bow. Eleanor curtsied. "Your Grace, thank you for receiving us." For one moment, something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, but close. "The journey from Wiltshire is long," he said. "I hope it was not too difficult." "It was perfectly comfortable, Your Grace." A small pause. He looked at her as if he was about to say something else, something that wasn't on the prepared list of arrival pleasantries. But then a sound came from the top of the steps, a slow, deliberate sound, the tap of a walking cane on stone. Lord Edmund Harwick, the Duke's father, descended the stairs the way men descend when they want you to watch them descend, one step at a time, head high, eyes calculating. He was perhaps 65, silver-haired, impeccably dressed. On the surface, everything about him said distinguished gentleman. But Eleanor had grown up watching her father negotiate with merchants and landlords. She knew how to read the space between a man's words and his eyes. Lord Harwick's eyes said something his mouth had not yet decided to say. He looked at Eleanor the way one looks at furniture that has been delivered to the wrong room. "Miss Ashworth," he said, not a welcome, a categorization. "Lord Harwick." Eleanor kept her voice even, warm but steady. He turned to the Duke. "James, have the guests' things brought in through the east corridor." A pause, deliberate, surgical. "The family wing is being aired." Eleanor understood immediately. The east corridor. She had read the manor's layout in an old county record. The east corridor connected to the servants' quarters. She said nothing. The Duke said nothing either, but she saw his jaw tighten, just slightly, just for a second. Lord Harwick smiled at her mother. "Mrs. Ashworth, you must be tired. I'll have tea sent up." He gestured to a housemaid. "Show them to the east rooms." And just like that, the welcome was over. The east rooms were not unpleasant. That was the worst part. If they had been truly awful, dark, dirty, cold, Eleanor could have been simply angry. Instead, they were perfectly adequate. Small, clean, a narrow window overlooking the kitchen garden. The kind of room that said, "You are being housed, not welcomed." Eleanor's trunk was brought in by a boy of perhaps 14 who couldn't meet her eyes. Her mother sat on the edge of the bed and said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Perhaps it is just the way of large houses." "Perhaps," Eleanor said. But she was already thinking, already watching, already cataloging every small thing she had seen in the last 20 minutes. The Duke's bow, Lord Harwick's cane, the housemaid's nervous glance, the 14-year-old boy who couldn't look at her. She sat down at the small writing desk by the window and looked out at the kitchen garden. A cook was crossing the yard below, carrying a basket. A gardener was trimming something near the wall. Life moving, ordinary, and indifferent. "Remember who you are," her mother had said. Eleanor straightened her back. She remembered. It was just past 9 in the evening when she heard a knock. Not the door. She was already in bed, reading by candlelight. The knock was soft, almost reluctant. She pulled her shawl around her shoulders and opened the door. No one was there. But on the floor, just inside the threshold, was a small folded piece of paper. She picked it up. The handwriting was hurried, slightly uneven, as if written by someone who was afraid of being seen. She unfolded it. 4 words. "Leave while you still can." Eleanor stood in the doorway for a long moment, the paper in her hand, the dark corridor stretching in both directions, silent, empty, lit only by a single wall sconce at the far end. She looked at the note again. Then she folded it carefully, walked back to her writing desk, opened the small wooden box where she kept her letters, and placed it inside. She closed the box, sat back down, and picked up her book. She had not come this far to be frightened by a piece of paper. Whoever had written it, whether out of kindness, or as a warning, or as a threat, they would soon learn one thing about Eleanor Ashworth. She did not leave. Eleanor had always believed that the most revealing thing about a household was not its grand rooms, or its silver, or its portraits on the wall. It was breakfast. Who sat, who stood, who was served, and who was expected to serve. That morning, Harwick Manor told her everything she needed to know. She came downstairs at 8:30, dressed carefully, her second-best morning dress, hair pinned neatly, posture straight. She had slept lightly, the folded note sitting in her wooden box like a small stone at the bottom of a river. She hadn't forgotten it, but she had decided, for now, to move around it. The dining room was easy to find. She followed the smell of coffee and the sound of silver on porcelain down the main corridor, through a set of tall double doors, and stopped. The table was long enough to seat 20. This morning it was set for 4. Lord Harwick at the head, the Duke to his right. A young woman Eleanor didn't recognize to his left, dark-haired, elegantly dressed, already seated, already comfortable. 4 places set. Eleanor counted them twice. There was no 5th. A housemaid stood near the sideboard. When Eleanor entered, the girl looked up, and then looked away very quickly, the way people look away when they know something uncomfortable is about to happen. Lord Harwick looked up from his newspaper. "Ah," he said, as if she were a minor appointment he had nearly forgotten. "Miss Ashworth, good morning." He gestured, not toward the table, toward the sideboard. "Mrs. Fenn will show you where things are kept. Breakfast service begins at 8. We keep a precise household." A silence landed in the room like a dropped tray. Eleanor did not move. "I beg your pardon, Lord Harwick?" "The sideboard." He said it pleasantly, the way one explains something to a child. "The family takes breakfast at 8. You may assist Mrs. Fenn with the service. It will help you learn the rhythm of the house." The Duke set down his coffee cup. He did not look at his father. He did not look at Eleanor. He looked at the table in front of him with the careful stillness of a man who is deciding something very quickly. The dark-haired woman, Eleanor still didn't know her name, watched the scene with mild, polished interest. Not cruel, merely entertained. Eleanor clasped her hands in front of her. "I am your son's intended, Lord Harwick," she said. Her voice was quiet, perfectly pleasant. "I am a guest in this house. I am happy to learn its rhythms, but I will do so as a member of the family, not as a member of the staff." The room went very still. Lord Harwick looked at her over the edge of his newspaper for a long moment. Something moved in his eyes. Not anger, not yet. Something more controlled than anger. A reassessment. Then he smiled. "Of course," he said smoothly, "I misspoke. James," he glanced at his son, "perhaps Miss Ashworth would like the chair near the window." The Duke stood immediately. "Miss Ashworth," he gestured to the chair beside him. "Not the window chair, his own chair, the better one. Please." Eleanor crossed the room, sat down, and accepted a cup of coffee from the housemaid with a quiet thank you. She had won that round. She knew it would not be the last. The dark-haired woman's name was Lady Cecilia Vane. Lord Harwick introduced her midway through breakfast, with the particular warmth he had not extended to Eleanor the previous day. "Lady Cecilia is an old friend of the family," he said. "Her father and I were at Oxford together. She'll be staying with us for the fortnight." "How lovely," Eleanor said. Lady Cecilia smiled at her, a perfectly shaped smile, practiced and impenetrable. "I've heard so much about you, Miss Ashworth." "I hope some of it was interesting," Eleanor said pleasantly. Something flickered in Lady Cecilia's eyes. Surprise, perhaps. She had expected meekness. The Duke, Eleanor noticed, said very little during breakfast. He ate, he listened, he refilled his coffee once, but twice, just twice, she caught him watching her. Not with the calculating look of his father, with something quieter, something she couldn't name yet. When Lord Harwick stood to leave, he paused behind Eleanor's chair. "Miss Ashworth," he said, his voice low, meant only for her. "I think you'll find that this house runs more smoothly when everyone understands their place. I do hope we understand each other." He moved on before she could respond. Eleanor looked down at her plate. Her hands, beneath the table, were pressed flat against her skirt, steady, still. After breakfast, the Duke found her in the corridor outside the library. She suspected it was not entirely accidental. "Miss Ashworth." He fell into step beside her, which was itself unusual. Men of his rank did not generally fall into step beside anyone. "I hope." A pause. He seemed to be choosing his words with some difficulty. "I hope last evening's arrangements were not too uncomfortable." "They were perfectly adequate, Your Grace." He stopped walking. She stopped too. "That is not what I asked," he said. She looked at him properly for the first time that morning, really looked. He was perhaps 30, lean, dark-haired like his father, but with his mother's eyes, she thought, though she had never seen his mother. There was something in his face that was permanently slightly tired, as though he had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had simply gotten used to the weight. "The rooms were fine," she said, more honestly this time. "The welcome was instructive." He held her gaze. "I apologize for any—" "You don't need to apologize for your father, Your Grace." Something shifted in his expression. Not offense, something more complicated. "No," he said quietly. "I suppose I don't." They stood there for a moment in the corridor, tall windows on one side, dark wood paneling on the other, winter light falling flat and gray between them. "The library is open to you," he said finally. "All of it. My mother was—" a brief pause. "She believed very strongly in the library." "Then I will make use of it," Eleanor said. "Thank you." He nodded and walked away. Eleanor watched him go. He knows, she thought. He knows something is wrong. But knowing and acting are very different things. She understood that too. She had lived it herself, in smaller ways, in smaller rooms. She turned and went into the library. The letter to her mother took her 20 minutes to write and 4 drafts to get right. The first draft said, "Father was right. This house is not what we hoped." The second draft said, "I am afraid I have made a mistake." The third draft said nothing. She stopped after 2 lines and stared at the wall. The fourth draft said, "Dear Mother, I am well. The manor is very grand. The Duke is a decent man. I expect the next few weeks will require patience. You know I have always had enough of that. Do not worry. I will write again on Thursday. Your Eleanor." She sealed it, set it aside for the morning post, and opened the first book she found on the nearest shelf. It was a French novel. She read 3 pages without taking in a single word. She found her mother in the east corridor just before supper, coming back from a walk in the kitchen garden, the only outdoor space that had been, without words, made available to them. Her mother's face told her everything before she spoke. "A letter came," her mother said quietly, "from your father." Eleanor took it. The handwriting was her father's, hurried, slightly anxious, the way it always looked when money was involved. "Eleanor, I have heard from Lord Harwick's solicitor. There is a matter of the settlement terms being reviewed. I do not fully understand the legal language, but I am told it is standard. I trust you are conducting yourself well. Much depends on this, much more than I initially conveyed. Father." Eleanor folded the letter. "Much more than I initially conveyed." She thought about what that meant. She thought about the east corridor. She thought about the breakfast table with 4 settings. She thought about the note on her floor. "Leave while you still can." She put the letter in her pocket. "Are you all right, my love?" her mother asked. "Yes," Eleanor said. And then, because she had never been able to lie well to her mother, "I will be." That night, Lord Harwick sent a footman to her door with a message. Not a note this time. A verbal summons. "His lordship requests Miss Ashworth's presence in the study at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. A private matter to discuss." Eleanor thanked the footman, closed the door, stood in the center of her small room for a moment, the evening quiet around her, the kitchen garden dark below the window. She thought about her father's letter, the settlement terms, much more than I initially conveyed. She thought about the Duke's face in the corridor. He knows something is wrong. She thought about Lord Harwick's voice behind her chair at breakfast. Everyone understands their place. Then she went to the writing desk, took out a clean sheet of paper, and wrote 4 words at the top. What does he want? Below it, she began to write every small thing she had observed since the carriage rolled through those iron gates. Every look, every pause, every word placed carefully in the wrong position. The way a woman catalogues a battlefield before anyone has admitted there is a war. She wrote until the candle burned low. Then she blew it out, lay down in the narrow bed, and stared at the ceiling in the dark. Tomorrow at 9 o'clock she would walk into Lord Harwick's study. She did not yet know what he wanted, but she was fairly certain she already knew what she would not give him. Lord Harwick's study smelled of leather and old money. That was the only way Eleanor could describe it. Not unpleasant, but deliberate. Every object in the room had been chosen to remind you of something. The massive oak desk, the rows of legal volumes behind glass, the portrait above the fireplace, a younger Lord Harwick, painted in the style of a man who had never doubted himself for a single day of his life. Eleanor sat in the chair across from the desk and kept her hands still in her lap. Lord Harwick did not sit immediately. He stood at the window for a moment, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the grounds, a performance of thoughtfulness. Then he turned, sat, and smiled at her. "Miss Ashworth, thank you for coming." As though she'd had a choice. "Of course, Lord Harwick." He opened a drawer, removed a document, several pages, folded once, tied with a thin black ribbon. He placed it on the desk between them and slid it forward with 2 fingers, the way a man slides something across a table when he wants to appear generous rather than demanding. "A formality," he said, "standard in arrangements of this kind." Eleanor looked at the document. She did not touch it yet. What kind of arrangement specifically? Another smile. Patient. Practiced. A conduct agreement. Common in great houses when a new, he paused, selecting his word carefully, addition joins the family. It simply outlines expectations, responsibilities, how the household operates. Eleanor reached forward and picked it up. She read slowly. Lord Harwick waited. She could feel him watching her face, measuring her reaction, waiting for the nod of a woman who signs without reading. She read every word. The document was 12 pages long, written in the formal legal language of the period, dense, layered, deliberately difficult to parse quickly. But Eleanor had grown up watching her father struggle through lease agreements and supplier contracts. She had learned early to read past the language to the meaning underneath. By page 3, she understood what it was. By page 7, her hands were completely, deliberately still. By page 12, she set it down on the desk and looked at Lord Harwick with an expression she had spent the last 22 years perfecting. Calm, open, giving nothing away. The document said, in 12 pages of careful legal language, the following things. Eleanor would defer to Lord Harwick's judgment in all matters relating to the household, the estate, and the Harwick family name. Eleanor would not correspond with her own family without Lord Harwick's prior knowledge. Eleanor would not discuss the terms of her marriage settlement, her personal circumstances, or any internal family matter with any person outside the manor walls. Eleanor would raise no complaint, make no petition, and seek no outside counsel without Lord Harwick's express written permission. And at the bottom, one final clause, tucked beneath 3 paragraphs of dense language about the preservation of family dignity. In the event that Miss Ashworth declines to execute this agreement, the betrothal contract entered into between the Harwick estate and the Ashworth family shall be considered void, and all related financial arrangements shall be subject to immediate review and dissolution. There it was. Sign, or the engagement ends. And with it, whatever financial arrangements her father had entered into that he had not fully conveyed. Eleanor folded her hands on top of the document. "You said this was standard," she said. "Quite standard. For whom?" A small pause. "I beg your pardon? I ask because I am not aware of any standard legal practice in England that requires a woman to seek written permission from her future father-in-law before writing a letter to her own mother." She kept her voice perfectly pleasant. "So I wonder, standard for whom exactly?" The smile did not leave Lord Harwick's face, but something behind it shifted. "Miss Ashworth, I think you may be reading the language too literally. The spirit of the document is simply—" "The spirit and the letter are the same thing in a legal document, Lord Harwick. That is rather the point of legal documents." Silence. Lord Harwick leaned back in his chair. He looked at her for a long moment, really looked, the way he had not bothered to look before, as though he was revising something. "You are a spirited young woman," he said. The word spirited in his mouth did not sound like a compliment. "I am an honest one," Eleanor said. "I will not sign this." She left the study at 9:43. She walked back through the corridor, up the east staircase, and into her room. She closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and allowed herself exactly 2 minutes of being frightened. Her father's letter. Much more than I initially conveyed. What had he agreed to? What had Lord Harwick's solicitor promised him, and at what cost? She thought about the final clause. All related financial arrangements shall be subject to immediate review and dissolution. Her family was not wealthy, she knew that. But she had not known, had not been told, how much depended on this arrangement, how deep the water was. 2 minutes. Then she stood up, straightened her dress, and went downstairs. She found the Duke in the East Garden, of all places, standing near the bare rose beds with his coat collar up against the cold, reading something. He looked up when he heard her footsteps on the gravel. "Miss Ashworth." A flicker of surprise. "I didn't expect... Are you well?" "Perfectly well, Your Grace." She stopped a few feet away. "I wonder if I might ask you something directly." He folded whatever he was reading and gave her his full attention. "Of course." "Did you know about the document your father asked me to sign this morning?" A pause. Not the pause of someone calculating, the pause of someone genuinely surprised. "What document?" She told him. Not all 12 pages, the essence of it. The conduct clauses, the correspondence restrictions, the final clause about the betrothal. The Duke listened without interrupting. His face, as she spoke, went through several things in careful succession. Confusion, then a particular kind of stillness, then something that might have been anger if he had allowed it to reach his face fully. He didn't. He kept it just below the surface, the way men of his upbringing were trained to keep everything just below the surface. When she finished, he said, "I was not aware of this document." "I see. I want to be clear." He stopped, started again. "This is not... I did not ask for." He pressed his lips together briefly. "I apologize, Miss Ashworth, genuinely." "You don't need to apologize for your father," she said, the same words she had used in the corridor yesterday. This time he looked at her differently when she said it. "No," he said quietly, "but perhaps I need to do something more than simply not apologize." Eleanor looked at him, the tired weight behind his eyes, the careful way he held himself, as though he had learned very young that feeling things too openly was a form of vulnerability he could not afford. She thought, he is a good man, inside a very difficult architecture. She said, "I think your father intends to end the engagement regardless of what I sign." The Duke was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, "I think so too." They stood in the cold garden, bare rose beds between them, the sky flat white above the manor walls. "Then what do you intend to do, Your Grace?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I don't yet know," he said, and for the first time Eleanor believed he was telling her the complete truth. That afternoon she was sitting in the library, her one uncomplicated refuge, when Lady Cecilia appeared in the doorway. Eleanor had been half expecting it. "Miss Ashworth." Lady Cecilia entered with the fluid ease of a woman who had never walked into a room she didn't own. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all." Lady Cecilia settled into the chair across from her with a small smile. She looked around the library with the fond, proprietary air of someone revisiting a familiar place. "I spent a great deal of time in this room as a girl," she said, "when my family visited. Lord Harwick was always very kind to us." Eleanor said nothing. She waited. "I think," Lady Cecilia said, adjusting her gloves, "that you are a very intelligent woman, Miss Ashworth." "Thank you. So I imagine you have already understood certain things about your situation here." "I imagine I have." Lady Cecilia looked at her directly, the first genuinely direct thing she had done. "Lord Harwick is very fond of James. He wants..." She paused. "He wants what is best for him." "And you believe you are what is best for him?" Eleanor said pleasantly. A brief silence. "I believe," Lady Cecilia said carefully, "that this match was arranged very quickly, without the usual considerations, and I think, If you are as intelligent as I believe you to be, you understand that certain situations have a natural resolution." Eleanor closed her book. She looked at Lady Cecilia, at the beautiful, careful, perfectly constructed surface of her, and felt something that surprised her. Not anger, not even dislike, something closer to pity. Because Lady Cecilia was not cruel. She was simply another woman in a different version of the same room, doing what she had been positioned to do, saying what she had been prepared to say, believing, perhaps sincerely, that she was acting in everyone's best interest. "Lady Cecilia," Eleanor said, "I appreciate your candor, truly." She opened her book again. "But I think you should know, I have never in my life arrived somewhere and left simply because the welcome was cold." Lady Cecilia stood. Something in her composure had shifted, not broken, but slightly rearranged. "No," she said quietly at the door, "I'm beginning to see that." She left. Eleanor turned a page. She did not read a single word on it. That evening, Lord Harwick sent no footman, no message. Instead, at supper, he announced, warmly, publicly, as though it were a wonderful piece of news, that a ball would be held at Harwick Manor in 10 days' time. A celebration, he said, in honor of the season. He looked at Eleanor when he said it. Eleanor smiled back. She already knew, from the way Lady Cecilia had looked at her in the library, that this ball was not a celebration. It was an arrangement. And she was fairly certain she already knew her assigned role in it. Later that night, she sat at her writing desk and unfolded the note from her first evening. "Leave while you still can." She turned it over. Plain paper, no distinguishing marks. The handwriting hurried, uneven, frightened. Someone in this house had wanted to warn her. That meant someone in this house was afraid of Lord Harwick. And that meant she was not the first. She folded the note carefully, placed it back in the box, and sat in the dark for a long time, thinking. The dress was ivory, not the warm, creamy ivory of a wedding gown or a fine evening dress. This was the pale, washed-out ivory of old linen, the kind of color that drains the light from a room and takes whatever warmth the face has with it. Eleanor stood in her doorway and looked at the box for a long moment before she touched it. It had appeared outside her door sometime between 7 and 8 in the morning. No note, no name, just the box, plain white, tied with a thin yellow ribbon, and inside it, this dress. She lifted it out carefully, held it up to the window light. It was not cheap. The fabric was real silk, the construction professional, the cut technically correct for the season. Someone had spent money on it, but it had been chosen with extraordinary precision to be wrong for her. Wrong color for her complexion, wrong neckline for her height. A small ruffle at the hem that would make her look, at best, girlish, at worst, ridiculous. It was the kind of dress you chose for a woman when you wanted her to disappear into a room. Eleanor laid it back in the box, closed the lid, and went to find her own gown. She had brought 2 evening dresses from home. Her mother had packed them carefully, one pale green, one deep burgundy, both modest, both clean-lined, both chosen by a woman who knew her daughter's face and figure and wanted her to look exactly like herself. Eleanor put on the burgundy. The ball began at 8. By 7:30, the manor was already transformed. Candles everywhere, the great hall cleared for dancing, the smell of hothouse flowers brought in from somewhere warm and expensive. Eleanor stood at the top of the east staircase and listened to the sounds rising from below. Voices, laughter, the tuning of instruments. Her mother appeared at her elbow, dressed in her best gray silk. "You look well," her mother said. Then, quietly, "The other dress was not suitable," Eleanor said. Her mother looked at her for a moment. Then she took Eleanor's arm and said nothing more. They went down together. The great hall was full. Perhaps 60 guests, county families, titled neighbors, a scattering of London visitors. Candlelight on jewels and polished floors. The kind of room that had been built specifically to make certain people feel significant and certain others feel small. Lord Harwick stood near the entrance, receiving guests with the practiced warmth of a man in his natural habitat. He saw Eleanor the moment she entered. His eyes moved from her face to her dress. Something tightened in his expression. Brief, controlled, quickly smoothed away. Eleanor smiled at him pleasantly. He smiled back. First point of the evening, she thought, already taken. Lady Cecilia was across the room in pale blue silk, perfectly chosen, perfectly worn, perfectly at home. She moved through the guests the way water moves through a familiar landscape. Everyone knew her. Everyone was glad to see her. She laughed at the right moments, touched arms at the right moments, turned her face at the right angle in the candlelight. She was, Eleanor admitted to herself honestly, genuinely lovely. And she was watching Eleanor from across the room with an expression that was not quite triumph and not quite guilt, something balanced uncomfortably between the two. The Duke appeared at Eleanor's side 20 minutes into the evening. Miss Ashworth. He offered his arm for the first dance, a country set, simple, public. The correct gesture for an engaged man toward his intended. Thank you, Your Grace. They took their place in the line. The music began. They did not speak for the first 2 passes. Then, quietly, during a turn that brought them briefly close, "The ivory dress," he said, very low. Eleanor looked at him. "I sent it back," she said simply. A pause. Then, "Good," one word. But the way he said it, something had shifted between last night and tonight. Something had been decided, perhaps quietly, in private, in whatever room James Harwick went to when he needed to think. They finished the dance. He bowed. She curtsied. He walked back to his father's side. It was during the 3rd set that Lord Harwick made his move. Eleanor was standing near the windows with her mother and an elderly couple from the neighboring estate, a perfectly comfortable conversation about winter gardens, when Lord Harwick appeared with Lady Cecilia on his arm. "Miss Ashworth," the warm voice, the practiced smile. "Allow me to introduce Lady Cecilia properly to your mother. Cecilia's family and ours go back 30 years. She is practically family already." Practically family. The words landed in the room like a stone into water. Eleanor watched her mother's face process them. Lady Cecilia greeted her mother with genuine grace. There was no fault to find there. She was charming. She was kind to the elderly couple. She said all the right things in all the right ways. And Lord Harwick stood slightly back and watched Eleanor watch Lady Cecilia with the satisfied expression of a man who has arranged his pieces well. Eleanor turned to him directly. "Lord Harwick," she said pleasantly, "you must be so glad to have Lady Cecilia visiting. It is always a comfort, I think, to have familiar company when one is planning significant changes." A tiny silence. Lord Harwick's smile did not waver. "Indeed." "I do hope," Eleanor continued, still pleasant, still warm, "that her visit has been everything you hoped for." She felt her mother's hand tighten very slightly on her arm. Lord Harwick looked at her, and for one unguarded moment, genuine calculation showed through the surface of his courtesy. "She knows," his eyes said. "Yes," Eleanor said back. Then Lady Cecilia said something charming to the elderly couple, and the moment passed. Halfway through the evening, Eleanor stepped out through the side doors onto the terrace for air. The night was cold and clear, frost on the stone balustrade, stars very sharp above the dark grounds. She stood there for a moment with her eyes closed, just breathing. Footsteps behind her. She turned. It was the Duke. He came to stand beside her at the balustrade, not close, a proper distance, but beside her. He looked out at the dark grounds. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes." "You don't have to say yes." She looked at him. In the dark, Away from the candlelight and the noise and his father's orbit, he seemed different. Younger, perhaps, or just less armored. "I'm tired," she said honestly. "Not physically, the other kind." He nodded slowly. "I know that kind." They stood in silence for a moment. "She's not," he started, then stopped. "Lady Cecilia." "Lady Cecilia is not a bad person," he said carefully. "I want you to know that I understand the distinction between who is responsible for a situation and who is placed in it." Eleanor looked at him. "That is a very precise way of thinking about it." "I've had some practice," he said quietly. Below them, the garden stretched away into darkness. From inside came the sound of the next set beginning, laughter, music, the scrape of shoes on the polished floor. "Your Grace," Eleanor said, "can I ask you something honestly?" "Yes." "Do you want this engagement to continue?" The question sat between them in the cold air. He turned to look at her directly. It was the most directly he had looked at her since the day she arrived. "Yes," he said, one word again. But not the same kind of yes she might have expected, not the yes of obligation or arrangement or family pressure. Something quieter than that. Something that had, she thought, surprised him slightly in the saying of it. She nodded, looked back at the grounds. "Then," she said, "I think we need to be more careful about what we each know and when we know it." He was quiet for a moment. "I think you're right," he said. They went back inside separately. Eleanor rejoined her mother. The Duke rejoined his father. Lady Cecilia was dancing with a young baronet, laughing at something he'd said. Lord Harwick stood near the fireplace, watching the room with the look of a man who believes he is conducting an orchestra. Eleanor took a glass of lemonade from a passing tray, stood quietly near the wall, watched. And somewhere between the fourth and fifth set of the evening, she began to understand something she had only half seen before. Lord Harwick was not simply managing her, he was managing everything. Every conversation, every placement, every introduction. The ball itself was a mechanism, carefully constructed, beautifully disguised. Lady Cecilia's presence, the ivory dress, the four-seat breakfast table, none of it was careless, none of it was casual. This was a man who had been running this manor, this family, this story for a very long time. The question was, what had the story looked like before she arrived? And what had happened to whoever had been in her position before? She found out sooner than she expected. Just before midnight, looking for her mother's shawl in the small anteroom off the main corridor, Eleanor heard voices. She was not trying to listen. The door was slightly ajar. The voices were low but clear in the quiet of the anteroom. Lord Harwick, and someone else, a man she didn't recognize. A lower voice. "Careful. Cannot drag on much longer. The Ashworth girl is more resilient than anticipated." A pause. "It doesn't matter," Lord Harwick said. "The engagement must be broken by Friday, one way or another. I want Cecilia in place before the season ends. And if the Duke—" "James will do what he has always done," Lord Harwick said, quietly, "certainly. He will defer to me." Silence. Eleanor stood completely still in the dark anteroom, her mother's shawl in her hands. The engagement must be broken by Friday. Today was Saturday. She had 6 days. She walked back into the ballroom, found her mother, handed her the shawl, smiled at the elderly couple who had reappeared with a question about winter roses, and inside her, very quietly, something that had been patient and watchful and careful made a decision. No more waiting, no more watching from the window. She had 6 days. She intended to use every one of them. Sunday passed quietly, too quietly. Lord Harwick was cordial at breakfast. Lady Cecilia was charming at lunch. The Duke was present at dinner, attentive, composed, saying the right things at the right moments. On the surface, Harwick Manor on a Sunday afternoon looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like. A great house, a family at rest, a perfectly ordered world. Eleanor sat in the middle of it and counted the hours. The engagement must be broken by Friday. 5 days now. She spent Sunday evening in the library, not reading, thinking. She had a habit, when she needed to solve something, of treating it the way her father treated a broken piece of farm equipment. Walk around it, look at every side, find where the mechanism had failed. Emotion later, mechanics first. The mechanism here was Lord Harwick. He controlled the house. He controlled the finances. He controlled, apparently, the Duke. He had a plan. Lady Cecilia, the engagement dissolved, everything tidy by the end of the season. He had been building toward this for longer than Eleanor had been here. What she needed was a crack. One place where the mechanism didn't hold. She thought about the Duke's face on the terrace. Yes, one word. Surprised by itself. She thought about the note on her floor. Leave while you still can. Someone in this house was afraid. And frightened people, in her experience, were not useless. They were simply waiting for something to be afraid toward instead of away from. She closed her book. She had her starting point. Monday morning she came downstairs at 7:30, half an hour before the household breakfast. The kitchens at that hour were warm and loud and entirely different from the rest of the manor. Steam, the smell of bread, the clatter of copper pans. 3 kitchen maids, a cook, a boy turning something on a spit. Eleanor stood in the doorway. The cook, a broad, capable woman of perhaps 50, looked up from her pastry board with an expression of profound surprise. Ladies of the house did not appear in kitchens at 7:30 on a Monday morning. "Miss Ashworth," she said carefully, "good morning." Eleanor smiled. "I'm so sorry to interrupt. I wondered if I might have a cup of tea before the household is up. I've been awake since 6, and I didn't want to trouble anyone." A pause. The kitchen maids exchanged a glance. The cook studied her for a moment. The direct, unhurried assessment of a woman who had worked in great houses long enough to have no illusions about anyone. Then she nodded at a stool near the end of the work table. "Sit down, then," she said. "Mary, tea for Miss Ashworth." Eleanor sat. She drank her tea. She asked the cook her name, Mrs. Briggs, and whether the winter had been hard on the kitchen garden. She listened more than she spoke. She thanked Mary for the tea by name. She did not ask any of the things she had come to find out. Not yet. She simply sat in the warm kitchen on a Monday morning and was a person rather than a guest. When she left, 20 minutes later, she felt 3 pairs of eyes following her to the door, with something different in them than when she had arrived. Not suspicion, not quite warmth yet, but the beginning of a reassessment. She's not what we expected. That was enough for now. She found the Duke at 10 o'clock. He was in the estate office, a room she had not been shown, had not been invited to, but had located by the simple method of following the sound of papers and a quietly frustrated voice that had said, "Where is the Alderton lease?" to no one in particular. She knocked on the open door. He looked up, surprised again. She was beginning to think she made a habit of appearing where he didn't expect her. "Miss Ashworth." "Your Grace, I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to ask, do you ride in the mornings? I noticed the stables, and I wondered if I might use one of the horses, if it would not be inconvenient." It was not the question she had actually come to ask, but it was a door. He set down his papers. "Of course, I'll have the groom." He stopped. "Actually, I ride at 8 most mornings. You are welcome to join me if you ride." "I do." "Tomorrow then, 8 o'clock." She nodded, turned to go. "Miss Ashworth." She stopped. "Are you well here?" he asked. The same question he had asked before, in the corridor, but different this time. The phrasing identical, the weight behind it entirely changed. Before it had been polite concern. Now it was something more direct, something that had been sitting with him since Saturday night on the terrace. She turned back. "I am managing," she said. "That is not what I asked." She looked at him steadily. "No," she said. "I know, and I think you already know the answer, Your Grace." A long pause. "I'm beginning to," he said. She spent the afternoon in the library. She was not looking for anything specific. That was what she told herself. She was simply reading, as she did every afternoon, working her way along the shelves with no particular system. History here, natural philosophy there. A shelf of estate records, a row of bound periodicals going back 40 years. And then, at the far end of the third shelf from the window, tucked between a volume on agricultural drainage and a collection of sermons nobody had opened in 20 years, a smaller book. Dark green cover, no title on the spine. Eleanor pulled it out. It was a personal journal. The handwriting inside was feminine, careful, slightly old-fashioned in its loops and angles. The first entry was dated 1798, 17 years ago. She looked at the inside cover. M. Harwick, private. M. Harwick, the Duke's mother. Eleanor stood very still for a moment. She was aware, precisely and completely, of what she was holding. This was not a document left out for guests. This was not a book on a library shelf. This was a private journal belonging to a woman who had been dead for, she calculated quickly, 9 years, based on what the Duke had told her. She should put it back. She looked at the spine. M. Harwick, private. She thought about the note on her floor. Leave while you still can. She thought about Lord Harwick's voice behind her chair at breakfast. Everyone understands their place. She thought about 12 pages of legal language designed to isolate a woman from her own family. She opened the journal to the first page. She did not read all of it. She told herself that. She read carefully, selectively, with the deliberate restraint of someone who knows they are trespassing, but believes the reason is sufficient. The early entries were ordinary: household notes, weather observations, small social events, a neighbor's card party, a visit to a cousin in Bath. The handwriting of a woman going about a life. But somewhere around 1801, 3 years in, something changed. Not in the handwriting. The handwriting stayed careful, controlled, but in the space between the words. Edmund feels I spend too much time in correspondence. He has asked me to limit my letters to family to once a fortnight. I have agreed. It seems a small thing. A few pages later, I mentioned to Edmund that I would like to visit my sister in Dorset. He feels the journey is too taxing for my health. Perhaps he is right. I have not been well. And then, a year later, James asked me today why I never go out anymore. I told him I preferred the library. He sat with me for an hour without speaking, just reading beside me. He is 11 years old, and he already understands, I think, that some silences are a form of company. I do not know whether to be glad of this or heartbroken. Eleanor sat down slowly in the armchair. She kept reading. The pattern that emerged was not dramatic. There was no single terrible event. It was quieter than that, and somehow worse for its quietness. A gradual narrowing. Correspondence restricted. Visits declined on her behalf. Opinions gently corrected in public, firmly overridden in private. A woman being slowly, carefully reduced, not through cruelty that anyone could point to, but through the steady removal of everything that made her herself. And through it all, Lord Harwick, charming at dinner, respected in the county, devoted in all visible ways to his wife and son. Eleanor turned to the last entry, dated 4 months before the Duchess died. The handwriting here was slightly less steady, not much, but enough. I have been thinking about James, about what he will when I am gone, and I think now that I will be gone before long, not from illness, from erasure. There is very little of me left that Edmund has not managed or controlled or diminished. I do not blame James. He was taught to trust his father above all things. Edmund has been careful about that, very careful. But if James ever reads this, if he ever finds it, I want him to know one thing. I want him to know that the life I lived here was not the life I chose, and I want him to be braver than I was. I want him to look clearly at the people in front of him and trust what he sees rather than what he has been told. I am leaving this here because I cannot send it anywhere, but I have learned that things left in the right place sometimes find the right hands. I trust that. M. Eleanor closed the journal, sat in the quiet library for a long time. Outside the windows, the winter light was already fading. 4 o'clock, nearly dark. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck the hour. Distantly, from the direction of the drawing room, she could hear Lord Harwick's voice, measured, warm, holding forth on something to someone. She thought about what she was holding. This was not evidence in any legal sense. It was a private journal. It proved nothing that a solicitor could act on. But it proved something else, something more important right now. It proved she was not imagining things. It proved she was not the first. And it proved, most importantly, most urgently, that Lord Harwick's control of his son had been built deliberately, over decades, beginning when James Harwick was 11 years old and sitting with his mother in a library because she had nowhere else to go. Eleanor stood up. She placed the journal carefully inside her cardigan, against her side, held in place by her arm. She walked out of the library. She had 4 days until Friday, and she had just found the one thing that might change everything. Not a legal document, not a financial record. A mother's voice, waiting 9 years to be heard. She was halfway up the east staircase when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. The Duke stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at her. He had come from the direction of the library. He had, she realized, seen her leave it. His eyes went to her arm, to the slight, telltale angle of it, holding something against her side. He looked at her face. She looked at his. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then the Duke said, very quietly, "What did you find?" Eleanor's hand tightened slightly against the journal. She came down 2 steps. "Something that was left for you," she said. "I think, not for me." His face went through several things very quickly. Then it went still, the particular stillness of someone who has just understood something they are not sure they are ready to understand. "My mother's things are in the east wing," he said, carefully. "The library shelves on the south wall. She used to—" He stopped. "Yes," Eleanor said quietly. Silence. "May I—" He stopped again. Something was happening in his face that he was not managing to keep below the surface this time. "Is it—" "It is hers," Eleanor said. "And it is difficult. I want you to know that before you read it." He stood at the bottom of the stairs for a long moment. Then he walked up, slowly, and stopped on the step below her. He held out his hand. Eleanor looked at him, at the tiredness in his face, the careful, composed surface of him, the 11-year-old boy who had sat in a library beside his mother because she had nowhere else to go. She took the journal from under her arm and placed it in his hand. He looked down at it, the dark green cover, his mother's handwriting on the inside, M. Harwick, private. He closed his fingers around it. "Thank you," he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Eleanor nodded. She went upstairs. She did not look back. But she heard him a moment later, not going back down toward the drawing room and his father's voice, but turning and walking away in the other direction, to whatever room James Harwick went to when he needed to be alone. She hoped it was far enough from Lord Harwick's study. She hoped he locked the door. That night, she sat at her writing desk and wrote in her own small notebook, not a letter, not to anyone, just the things she knew, ordered carefully, with the dates and the details and the spaces between them. At the bottom of the page, she wrote, "He will read it tonight. Tomorrow, everything will be different." She paused, added, "Or he will fold it back up and put it somewhere safe and go on as before." She looked at both sentences for a long time. Then she closed the notebook. She had done what she could do today. Tomorrow at 8 o'clock she would ride, and she would find out which kind of man James Harwick, Duke of Blackmore, had decided to be. He was already at the stables when she arrived. 8 o'clock exactly. She had been precise about that, had wound her small travel clock before bed and set it on the writing desk where she would see it first thing. She had dressed carefully for riding, sensible boots, her dark green habit, hair pinned tightly under her hat. She had come prepared for many versions of this morning. What she had not prepared for was the look on his face. He stood beside his horse with one hand on the animal's neck, not moving, not checking the girth or adjusting the stirrup, or doing any of the things a man does at a stable when he is waiting comfortably. He was simply standing, still. He had not slept. She could see it from 20 feet away, the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have been awake all night, not because they couldn't sleep, but because sleep would have required setting something down, and they were not ready to set it down. His eyes, when he looked up at her, were clear. That surprised her. She had half expected red rims, the rawness of a man who had wept. But his eyes were clear and very direct, and carried in them something she had not seen there before. Certainty. "Miss Ashworth," he said, "Your Grace." The groom brought out her horse, a steady bay mare, sensibly chosen. Eleanor mounted without assistance, which seemed to surprise the groom and not surprise the Duke at all. They rode out through the stable yard in silence. The grounds in early morning were different from anything Eleanor had seen of them so far. The frost was still on the grass, the light low and silver, the bare trees casting long shadows across the parkland. Their horses' breath made small clouds in the cold air. They rode for perhaps 10 minutes without speaking. Eleanor did not push it. She had learned, in the last week, that James Harwick was a man who needed to find the door himself. You could stand near it. You could leave it slightly open. But if you pushed, he would step back, and whatever had been about to happen would close over like water. So she rode beside him and looked at the frost on the grass and waited. "I read it," he said. "I know." A long pause. Their horses moved together at an easy walk, side by side, the manor visible behind them through the trees. "All of it," he said. Eleanor said nothing. "I knew—" He stopped, started again with the precision of a man being very careful not to say more or less than he means. "I knew—" He stopped, started again with the precision of a man being very careful not to say more or less than he means. "I knew my mother was unhappy, toward the end. I was away at school for much of it, and when I came home she was quieter than she had been. I thought it was illness. I thought it was age. I thought—" A brief pause. "I thought many things that were easier to think." "You were a child for most of it," Eleanor said. I was away at school for much of it, and when I came home, she was quieter than she had been. I thought it was illness. I thought it was age. I thought—" A brief pause. "I thought many things that were easier to think." "You were a child for most of it," Eleanor said. "I was not a child at the end." She looked at him. His jaw was set, not in anger, in the particular way of a man holding himself accountable for something he cannot undo. "No," she said, "but you were a son, and you had been taught, very carefully, who to trust." He looked at her sharply. "She wrote that," he said. "Yes." "About me?" "About herself," Eleanor said carefully. "But yes, about you too." He turned back to the path ahead. They rode in silence for another minute. "She said he was careful about it," he said, "about teaching me to trust him. She said it was deliberate." "Yes." "Do you believe that?" Eleanor considered. "I think," she said, "that some men do things deliberately,
And some men do things by nature, and the result is very similar. I'm not sure which is worse."
He was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the conduct document. Yes. About the breakfast table. Yes. About the dress." Eleanor looked at him. "You knew about the dress." "I found out." Something moved briefly across his face. "I should have acted sooner." "You are acting now," Eleanor said. "That is—" He stopped, shook his head slightly. "That is more generous than I deserve." "Perhaps, but we have—" She paused. 3 days now. She had told herself not to mention the Friday deadline, not yet, not until she understood how much he knew. But something in the directness of this morning made her change her mind. "Your Grace," she said, "I need to tell you something." He looked at her. "Saturday night, before the ball ended, I was in the anteroom off the main corridor, looking for my mother's shawl." She kept her voice even. "I heard your father speaking with someone. He said," she was precise about this, as she had been precise in her notebook, "he said the engagement must be broken by Friday, one way or another." Silence. The horses walked on, frost crunching softly under their hooves. "Friday," he repeated. "Today is Tuesday." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Who was he speaking to?" "I don't know. A man. Someone with authority, or someone your father was treating as though he had authority. A solicitor, perhaps." The Duke's hand tightened slightly on his reins. His horse felt it and tossed its head gently. He loosened his grip, automatically, and patted the animal's neck. "He has a solicitor," he said. "Pemberton. He has handled the Harwick estate affairs for 20 years. A pause. "My affairs, technically. The estate is mine. Has been since I came of age." Eleanor looked at him. But I have always deferred to my father on legal matters, on all matters largely." He said it flatly, without self-pity. A statement of fact about a pattern he was seeing clearly, perhaps for the first time. "Pemberton sends reports to my father's desk. I sign what is placed in front of me." "The settlement terms," Eleanor said quietly, "with my family." He closed his eyes briefly, just for a second. "Yes, I did not draft those. I was told they were standard." Eleanor thought about her father's letter, much more than I initially conveyed. She thought about the final clause of the conduct document. "All related financial arrangements shall be subject to immediate review and dissolution." "My father entered into some kind of financial arrangement," she said. "I don't know the details. He didn't tell me. But whatever it was, Lord Harwick holds the terms." The Duke stopped his horse. Eleanor stopped hers beside him. They sat in the cold morning air, the Manor behind them, the parkland stretching ahead, 2 horses patient and still. "Ms. Ashworth," he said, "I owe you a significant apology." "You don't." "I do." He turned to look at her directly. "You came to this house in good faith. You were given a servant's corridor and a conduct document and a dress designed to humiliate you. And I stood in the same house and told myself my father's behavior was manageable, that it would resolve itself, that if I was patient and careful and did not push too hard, everything would find its way to being right." He paused. "I have been telling myself that for approximately 20 years, about many things." Eleanor held his gaze. "Your mother said something in the journal," she said. "She said she wanted you to look clearly at the people in front of you and trust what you see rather than what you have been told." Something crossed his face, a pain that was old and new at the same time. "Yes," he said, "I read that." "What do you see?" Eleanor asked. "When you look clearly?" He looked at her for a long moment. The frost on the grass, the silver morning light, her dark green habit, her steady hands on the reins, her face that gave nothing away and somehow, because of that, gave everything. "A woman,"
he said slowly, "who has been wronged in my house, who has been patient and precise and far more dignified than the situation deserved." A pause. "And a father who has been, he stopped, "who has been running a story," Eleanor said quietly, "for a very long time." Yes, the word came out stripped of everything except honesty. Yes, that is exactly what he has been doing.
They rode back slowly. At the stable yard, the groom took their horses. The Duke stood for a moment in the yard, looking at the manor, at the gray stone walls and the tall windows and the ivy and the enormous, indifferent solidity of it all. "I need to speak to Pemberton," he said, "today, without my father knowing." He looked at Eleanor. "Will you trust me with 2 days?" "You have until Friday," she said. 2 days, he said. "I need to understand what my father has built, legally, financially, all of it." His voice was quiet, but the certainty she had seen in his face at the stables was still there, harder now, more focused. "I cannot act on what I feel. I need to know what I can act on." Eleanor nodded. "There is one more thing," she said. She told him about the note, the 4 words on her floor the first night, "Leave while you still can." He listened without expression. "Someone in this house is afraid of your father," she said. "Afraid enough to warn a stranger in the middle of the night, but not enough to say more than 4 words. He was quiet for a moment. "I think I know who," he said. "Then perhaps," Eleanor said, "you should speak to them too." She spent the morning in her room, writing. Not to her mother this time, to her father. It took her a long time to find the right words, not too much, not too little. She needed him to understand without panicking. She needed him to hold on to whatever he had signed without making sudden moves that Lord Harwick's solicitor might notice. She wrote, "Dear Father, I am well and the engagement proceeds. I ask only one thing of you. Do not agree to any revision of the settlement terms until you hear from me directly. Trust nothing that comes through Lord Harwick's solicitor. Wait for my letter. I will write by Thursday at the latest. I promise you that I am not writing this out of fear, but out of care. Trust me. Eleanor." She sealed it, addressed it, and went down to give it to the morning postboy herself. Lord Harwick was in the hallway when she came downstairs. He watched her cross to the post table. He watched her hand the letter to the boy. He said nothing, but his eyes followed the letter the way a man's eyes follow something he intended to intercept and has just missed. Eleanor smiled at him pleasantly. "Good morning, Lord Harwick." "Good morning, Miss Ashworth." The warm voice, the practiced smile. "I trust you enjoyed your ride?" "Very much," she said. "Your son is excellent company." Something moved behind his eyes. "Yes," he said, "he is." Eleanor went back upstairs. That evening the Duke did not appear at dinner. Lord Harwick explained smoothly that James had been called away on an estate matter, a tenant issue in the Northfield, very dull, very necessary. Lady Cecilia expressed polite concern. Eleanor's mother asked whether it was serious. "Not at all," Lord Harwick said. "These things arise." Eleanor ate her soup. She thought, Pemberton. She thought, he found him. He is already looking. She thought, 2 days. After dinner, Lord Harwick asked Eleanor to join him in the drawing room for a private word. She came. He poured 2 glasses of sherry, one for each of them, and settled into his armchair with the ease of a man in his own territory. "Miss Ashworth," he said, "I want to speak plainly." "Please," Eleanor said. "I think we have perhaps begun on difficult terms," he said. "I want to remedy that." He leaned forward slightly. "I am a man who is very protective of his son, of his future, of the legacy of this family. I think you can understand that." "I can," Eleanor said. "James is—" He paused. "James is a good man, a gentleman in many ways. He needs someone in his life who understands the weight of what he carries, someone who fits the world he lives in." Another pause.
I mean no unkindness to you, Miss Ashworth. Your family is respectable. You yourself are, clearly, capable. The word landed with careful precision. But I think, if you are honest with yourself, you know that this is not your world. Eleanor looked at him.
She thought about the journal. There is very little of me left that Edmund has not managed or controlled or diminished. She thought about the Duke's face this morning, the certainty in it. She thought about a woman who had hidden a journal on a library shelf and written, "I trust that." "Lord Harwick," Eleanor said, "may I speak plainly in return?" He gestured graciously. "I think," she said, "that you are a man who has spent a very long time deciding what is best for the people around you. And I think you have become so skilled at it that you have stopped noticing when those people have made their own decisions." A silence. Lord Harwick looked at her, and this time he did not bother with the smile. "You are very confident," he said. "I am very clear," Eleanor said. "There is a difference." She set down her untouched glass of sherry, stood, and curtsied. "Good night, Lord Harwick." She walked to the door. "Miss Ashworth." She stopped, did not turn. "Friday," he said, quietly. A reminder, a warning. "Thursday," Eleanor said, and left. Wednesday arrived cold and sharp. Eleanor was at her writing desk before sunrise, watching the kitchen garden come slowly out of the dark below her window. The cook, Mrs. Briggs, crossed the yard at 6:30 with a lantern, the same route she took every morning, unhurried and precise as a clock. Eleanor had learned her rhythms. She had learned a great deal about the rhythms of this house in 10 days. She thought about what she had said to Lord Harwick last night, Thursday. She had said it without knowing exactly what she meant by it. Not a plan, not a promise. More like a line drawn in the air, something to aim at. She needed today to go right. She needed the Duke to have found something. He appeared at 10 o'clock. Not at breakfast. He had still not returned by the time the household sat down, and Lord Harwick had filled his absence smoothly, talking with Lady Cecilia about a mutual acquaintance in London, including Eleanor's mother in just enough of the conversation to appear gracious. Eleanor had eaten quietly and said almost nothing, and watched everything. At 10 o'clock she heard horses in the stable yard below her window. She was at the library door 2 minutes later. The Duke came in through the east entrance, the servants' entrance, she noted, with his coat dusty from hard riding and a leather satchel under his arm. He saw her immediately. "Miss Ashworth." His voice was low and quick. "Is my father in the house?" "Drawing room. Lady Cecilia is with him." He nodded. "Come with me." He took her to his mother's sitting room. She had not been in it before. It was in the east wing, past the room she had been given, past a corridor that turned unexpectedly and arrived at a door that looked like a cupboard until you opened it. Inside, a small south-facing room, bare of personal objects now, but still carrying the particular quality of a room that had once been lived in by someone who loved light. 2 chairs, a writing desk, a window looking out at the kitchen garden. The Duke sat down at the desk. Eleanor took the other chair. He opened the satchel and laid out the contents: papers, ledgers, 2 folders of documents tied with ribbon. "Pemberton was reluctant," he said. He said the word with a precision that suggested reluctant was doing significant work. "He has handled my father's affairs for 20 years. He did not want to hand estate records to me directly. But he did. He did." Something brief and hard in his voice. "Because the estate records are mine. They have always been mine. Pemberton knew it. He simply preferred not to be reminded." Eleanor looked at the papers spread before her. "What did you find?" What the Duke had found was not a single terrible thing. It was, like the journal, quieter than that, and worse for its quietness. He walked her through it methodically. The same precision she had observed in him from the beginning, now aimed at something that was costing him considerably to aim it at.
The Harwick estate finances, nominally, were healthy. The land was productive, the investments solid, the debts manageable. On paper, everything was correct. But underneath the surface, in a series of sub-accounts managed exclusively through Pemberton, in a set of settlement arrangements and property transfers dating back 12 years, a different picture. Lord Harwick had been, slowly and carefully, moving money. Not stealing it precisely, nothing so crude, but transferring funds from estate accounts into personal accounts, securing interests in certain properties that were technically part of the Harwick estate, under his own name rather than the estate's. Building, over 12 years, a financial position that was separate from the dukedom, and that would, under certain circumstances, be very difficult for the duke to challenge. The Ashworth settlement, Eleanor said. Yes. The duke opened the relevant folder. Your father borrowed money 3 years ago, a significant sum. I don't know the circumstances. The debt was purchased through Pemberton by an account that nominally belongs to the estate, but is in practice controlled by my father. Eleanor was very still. So, my father's debt, she said carefully, is owed to your father? In practice, yes. She thought about her father's letter. Much more than I initially conveyed. She thought about the final clause of the conduct document. All related financial arrangements shall be subject to immediate review and dissolution. Lord Harwick had not merely arranged an engagement. He had bought the ability to end it on his own terms, at any time he chose, with financial consequences for her family that her father had not fully understood when he signed. She looked at the papers, then at the Duke. He bought us, she said, quietly, not with bitterness, just with clarity. The Duke did not look away. Yes, I think that is what he did. And the conduct document, if I had signed it, it would have made any legal challenge to the arrangement significantly more difficult. He folded his hands on the desk. You would have agreed, in writing, to raise no complaint and seek no outside counsel. With that in place, even if you later objected to the financial terms, my father's solicitor could argue you had accepted the conditions of the arrangement. Eleanor sat back. She thought about the woman who had signed things, who had agreed because each thing seemed small, because each concession seemed reasonable, because the man asking was charming and patient and always had an explanation. There is very little of me left. Your mother, Eleanor said. Were there documents for her? The Duke was quiet for a moment. I don't know yet, he said. Pemberton wouldn't give me everything, not willingly. But I have a name, a London solicitor my mother used independently before the marriage. I wrote to him last night. I don't know if he still has records. Eleanor nodded. They sat in the small south-facing room for a moment, the winter light coming through the window, the papers spread between them. What can you do, she asked, legally, with what you have? The financial transfers, Pemberton's accounts, those are contestable. Not quickly and not without difficulty, but contestable. He chose his words carefully. The estate is mine. My father has authority I gave him through habit and deference, not through any legal right. Pemberton knew that. He has been walking a line, I think, for some years, hoping no one looked closely. And now someone has? Now someone has. Eleanor looked at the papers again. Then she said, Your father told me Friday last night, as a warning. I know. Today is Wednesday. I know. He looked at her steadily. I have an appointment with my own solicitor, not Pemberton, in the village this afternoon. I rode out this morning to send the express. He will come today. A pause. I should have done this 10 days ago. I should have done it 10 years ago. You are doing it now, Eleanor said. You keep saying that, because it keeps being true. Something in his face shifted, not quite a smile, but the shape of one underneath everything else. Miss Ashworth, he said, I want to ask you something. Yes. The night you arrived, the note under your door. He looked at her directly. "I know who wrote it." Eleanor waited. "Mrs. Briggs," he said, "the cook."
Eleanor thought of the woman at the pastry board, the unhurried assessment, the stool by the work table. "Sit down, then." "She has been here 22 years, the Duke said. "She was here when my mother was here. She watched—" He stopped briefly. "She watched what happened. And she has stayed because she had nowhere to go and because, I think, she felt she owed my mother something, a kind of witness." He paused. "She will not speak openly. She is too afraid for that. But she wrote that note." "She warned me," Eleanor said. "She warned you." He looked down at the papers. "She tried to warn me once, years ago. I didn't listen. I told myself she was a cook with a grudge, and my father was—" He stopped. "You were grieving," Eleanor said. "I was avoiding," he said. "There is a difference." She looked at him, at the tiredness that was still there in his face but had changed quality overnight. Less the tiredness of a man carrying something unexamined, more the tiredness of a man who has finally set it down and is feeling the full weight of it for the first time. "What will you tell your father?" she asked. "Nothing yet. Not until my solicitor has reviewed the transfers." He began gathering the papers carefully, returning them to the satchel. "My father he is very good at this, at finding the one lever that moves things. If I confront him before I have the full picture, he will find a way to manage it. He will apologize, he will explain, he will make me feel that I have misunderstood something, that I am being hasty, that I am hurting him." He stopped himself. "The anesinen hatarasa," Eleanor said softly. "Your mother's memory." He looked up sharply. "He will use it," Eleanor said, "when you confront him. He will use your grief for her." "Yes," the Duke said, "I know." "Are you prepared for that?" A long pause. "No," he said honestly, "but I intend to do it anyway." The solicitor arrived at 3 o'clock. Eleanor knew because she was in the kitchen with Mrs. Briggs, ostensibly asking about the household's approach to winter preserves, actually sitting in the warm kitchen being a person rather than a guest, which she had continued to do every morning, and which had produced, by Wednesday, a relationship of quiet mutual understanding that required very few words. She heard the carriage. Mrs. Briggs heard it too. Their eyes met briefly across the work table. The cook said nothing. Eleanor said nothing. Mrs. Briggs put a second cup of tea in front of her and went back to her pastry. Lord Harwick found Eleanor at 4 o'clock. She was in the library, her chair, her book, the appearance of a woman spending a quiet afternoon. She had chosen the book carefully. It was a volume on English property law, pulled from the estate records shelf, and she had it open to a page about settlement agreements. She did not hide it when he walked in. He looked at the book. His eyes moved to her face. "Miss Ashworth," he said. The warm voice was still present, but something underneath it had changed. A new quality, not anger, alertness. The alertness of a man who has just noticed that the ground beneath him is not quite where he thought it was. "Lord Harwick," she did not close the book. "Can I help you?" He came fully into the room and closed the door behind him, sat down in the chair across from her, the chair she had come to think of as the chair people sat in when they wanted something from her. "I think," he said, "that we should have an honest conversation." "I would welcome that," Eleanor said. "My son came home this morning," Lord Harwick said, "with a satchel, and he has been locked in his study with a solicitor for the past hour." Eleanor said nothing. "I wonder," Lord Harwick said carefully, "if you know anything about that." "I wonder too," Eleanor said pleasantly. A silence. Lord Hardwick looked at her, really looked. The full assessment, nothing held back. She had the sense of being weighed on a scale by a man who had been weighing people for 40 years and was encountering something that was not coming out at the expected number. "You are not what I anticipated," he said. "No," Eleanor agreed. "I don't think I am." "I want to make you an offer," he said.
A serious one. Not the conduct document. I understand that was poorly received. A pause. The closest he would come to acknowledging a mistake. A financial arrangement. For your family. The debt your father holds, it would be retired, entirely. In exchange for a quiet withdrawal from the engagement. No scandal, no difficulty. Your family would be comfortable, you would be free. Eleanor closed the property law book. She set it on the side table. She clasped her hands in her lap, and she thought about the Duchess's journal. There is very little of me left. She thought about the note on her floor. Leave while you still can. She thought about her mother's hand squeezing hers at the gate. Remember who you are. She thought about a duke at the bottom of a staircase, holding out his hand for a dark green journal, and the certainty in his face the next morning. Lord Harwick, she said, I am going to say something to you that I want you to hear clearly. He waited. I did not come to this house for your money, she said. I did not come for the title, or the estate, or the social position. I came because a man asked my family honorably, and I believed the arrangement was made in good faith. She kept her voice even. I have been insulted and isolated and threatened in this house. I have been given a servant's room and a humiliating dress and a document designed to make me legally powerless. And I have watched you use your dead wife's memory to keep your son in a cage he has been too loyal to see. Lord Harwick had gone very still. I will not be bought, Eleanor said, and I will not leave quietly. Not because I am stubborn, but because what you have done here deserves to be seen clearly, by your son at the very least. Silence. Lord Harwick looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face that she had not seen there before. Not anger, not calculation. Something older than both of those. Something that might, in a different man, have been shame. Then it was gone. You are making a very serious mistake, he said quietly. Perhaps, Eleanor said, but it will be mine to make. He left. Eleanor sat in the library alone for a few minutes, her hands very steady in her lap, her heart not quite steady beneath them. Then the door opened. It was the Duke. He stood in the doorway, his coat still on, the satchel still over his shoulder, something in his face that told her the meeting with his solicitor had gone the way she had hoped. He looked at her. My father just passed me in the corridor, he said. He paused, searching for the word. Uncertain, Eleanor offered. Yes. He stepped into the library. My solicitor believes the financial transfers are contestable. It will take time, months, perhaps longer, but the foundation is there. He paused. He also believes that, with the right documentation, I can remove Pemberton from the estate accounts entirely and establish independent oversight. Eleanor nodded. There is one more thing, he said. He came further into the room, slowly, and stopped near the window. My father knows that I have been to see a solicitor, that I am looking at the accounts. He looked at her. He will move tonight, I think. He will come to me with everything he has, every argument, every memory, He stopped, pressed his lips together briefly. He is very good at it. I want you to know that I understand what is coming. Are you afraid? Eleanor asked. He considered the question honestly. Yes. Good, she said. It means you're thinking clearly. Something in his face, that not quite smile again, more visible this time. Miss Ashworth, he said, whatever happens tonight, I want you to know that He stopped, started again with the precision she had come to recognize as his particular form of courage. I see you clearly. I want you to know that. Whatever my father does or says or threatens, I see you clearly and I know what I think. Eleanor looked at him. She thought, this is a man coming out of a long, dark room into the light. It will take him some time to find his footing, but he is walking toward it. Then that, she said, is enough. That night, she heard them.
She was not trying to listen. She was in her room, dressed for bed, her candle low, the Manor quiet around her. But Lord Harwick's study was 3 doors down, and the walls of old houses carry sound in unexpected ways, and some voices, when they are raised, travel further than their owners intend. She could not hear words, only tone. Lord Harwick's voice, controlled, then urgent, then something she had never heard from him before, something cracked open in it. The Duke's voice, low, steady, not raised, immovable in the way that quiet things are sometimes more immovable than loud ones. Then a long silence. Then Lord Harwick's voice again, different now, smaller, the voice of a man who has played his last card and watched it sit on the table doing nothing. Then nothing. Eleanor sat in the dark and listened to the silence. It went on for a long time. Then she heard footsteps in the corridor, measured, unhurried. They stopped outside her door. A knock, soft, certain. She opened it. The Duke stood in the corridor. His coat was off, his cravat loosened, his face carrying the particular stripped quality of a man who has just said everything he needed to say and is standing in the aftermath of it. He looked at her. "It is done," he said quietly. Eleanor held the doorframe. "Are you all right?" she asked. He considered this with the honesty she had come to rely on. "No," he said, "but I will be." She nodded. "Your father?" she asked. "He will—" A pause. "He is not well tonight. He is—" He searched for the word. "Diminished. I have never seen him diminished before." Something moved in his face, complicated, old, not triumph, nothing like triumph. "I told him what I know, what Pemberton built, what the accounts show." He paused. "I told him what my mother wrote." Eleanor was quiet. "He did not deny it," the Duke said. "That was—" He stopped. "That was the part one was not prepared for. I expected argument, explanation, the lever." He looked at the floor briefly. "He did not deny it. He simply—" A long pause. "He said she was difficult, that she didn't understand, that everything he did was for the family." He looked up. "And I thought, I have heard those words before, in different forms, about different people, and I understood, finally, that they were never about the family. They were about control," Eleanor said. "Yes." They stood in the corridor for a moment, the house quiet around them, a clock ticking somewhere below. "My solicitor will return Thursday morning," the Duke said. "There will be documents to sign. The accounts, Pemberton's removal." He paused. "And the settlement terms with your family will be restructured. Your father's debt, I will handle that personally. It will not be held over you or over him." Eleanor's throat tightened briefly. She kept her face still. "Thank you," she said. "It is the—" He stopped. "It is not enough, but it is a beginning." He looked at her for a moment longer. "Miss Ashworth," he said, "I said I see you clearly. I want to add—" A pause. The precision again, the form of courage. "I would like, if you are willing, to begin again, properly, without my father's arrangements and without his architecture." He said the word she had used days ago, quietly, as if he had been thinking about it since. "I would like to make my own choices." Eleanor looked at him, standing in the corridor, coat off, cravat loose, face stripped bare of everything except honesty. She thought, this is what he looks like when no one is managing him. She found she liked it very much. "Ask me again on Friday," she said, "when it is properly done." Something in his face, not the not quite smile this time, the real one. "Friday," he said. "Good night, Your Grace." "Good night, Miss Ashworth." She closed the door, stood in the center of her small room in the dark. Outside the window, the kitchen garden was silver with frost. Below, in the yard, a single light burned in the stable,
A groom moving, unhurried, the ordinary life of the house continuing as it always had and always would, indifferent to everything that had just shifted inside its walls. Eleanor blew out her candle, lay down, stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, she thought. Thursday, and then Friday. She closed her eyes. For the first time since the carriage had rolled through those iron gates, she slept without waking once. Thursday arrived like a held breath finally released. Eleanor was at the kitchen table by 7, not because she needed to be, but because the kitchen was the one room in Harwick Manor that had never pretended to be anything other than what it was. Warm, honest, purposeful. Mrs. Briggs set a cup of tea in front of her without being asked, and went back to her bread without comment. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes. Then Eleanor said, quietly, "The note. First night I arrived." Mrs. Briggs did not stop working. Her hands moved steadily over the dough. "I don't know what you mean, miss," she said. "No," Eleanor agreed. "Of course not." A pause. "She was a good woman," Mrs. Briggs said. To the dough, to the work table, to no one in particular. The Duchess. She deserved better than she got. "Yes," Eleanor said, "she did." Mrs. Briggs turned the dough once, firmly, and said nothing more. Eleanor drank her tea. The solicitor, Mr. Carver, a lean, precise man of perhaps 50, with the careful eyes of someone who had spent his career reading documents other people had hoped he wouldn't read, arrived at 9:30. He came in through the front entrance. That, Eleanor thought, was already different. She was in the library when she heard the arrival. She stayed where she was. This was not her part of the morning, not yet. The Duke needed this hour with his solicitor without her presence complicating anything. She had learned in the past 10 days the precise geography of when to be present and when to make herself absent. She read 3 pages of her book without taking in a word. At 10:30, the library door opened. The Duke. "Miss Ashworth, would you come?" The estate office looked different than when she had found it a week ago, the comfortable disorder of a working room where one man set his own terms. Now the desk was cleared, documents arranged in neat rows, Mr. Carver standing to one side with a pen and an expression of professional composure. Lord Harwick was also in the room. That was the thing she had not expected. He stood near the window, not at the desk, not in his habitual position of command. Near the window, slightly apart, in the attitude of a man who has been told he may be present but has not been invited to participate. He was dressed immaculately, as always. His face was composed, but something had gone out of it. Eleanor had thought, the night before, that the Duke had said the word diminished and that she would understand it when she saw it. Now she saw it. Lord Harwick at 70%, going through the correct motions, the performance still there, but the force behind it, the absolute certainty, the unquestioned authority, quietly absent. He looked at Eleanor when she entered. She met his eyes briefly, and then looked at the desk. Mr. Carver went through it methodically. It took the better part of an hour. Eleanor sat to one side and listened. She had been asked to witness, the Duke had said, because she had a right to understand the terms that affected her family directly. The Pemberton accounts, 3 sub-accounts, 12 years of transfers. Mr. Carver laid out what had been moved, how, under what nominal justification. It was not embezzlement in the simplest sense. Lord Harwick had been too careful for that. But it was a systematic redirection of estate resources into personal control. And it was, Mr. Carver said in his precise, careful voice, contestable under the terms of the original Harwick Estate Trust. The Duke signed 4 documents. Each signature moved something, an account, an oversight responsibility, a legal authority, back to where it had always technically belonged. To the Duke of Blackmore, to James Harwick, to the man whose name was on the estate and who had, for 20 years, allowed someone else to hold the pen. Pemberton would be notified today. His authority over estate affairs was revoked. Mr. Carver would handle the transition.
Then Mr. Carver opened the second folder, the Ashworth settlement. Eleanor kept her hands still in her lap. Mr. Carver read the terms, the original agreement, the debt acquisition, the conduct clauses, the dissolution clause. He read it without inflection, the way lawyers read things, giving equal weight to every word. When he finished, the Duke said, "I want the debt retired, my personal account, today." Mr. Carver nodded and made a note. "The conduct agreement is void," the Duke continued. "It was never presented to me for approval. It has no standing." Another note. "The settlement terms are to be renegotiated, directly between my solicitor and Miss Ashworth's family, without intermediaries." He paused. "Without my father's involvement." Mr. Carver looked up briefly. "Understood, Your Grace." The Duke signed 2 more documents. Then he looked at Eleanor. "Is there anything you want to add?" Eleanor thought for a moment. "My family should receive written confirmation," she said, "that the debt is retired and that no further financial claim exists against them under any arrangement connected to the Harwick estate. Clearly worded, today." Mr. Carver wrote it down without hesitation. "Of course, Miss Ashworth." Lord Harwick had not spoken once during the entire proceeding. Now, as Mr. Carver gathered his papers and the Duke stood from the desk, Lord Harwick moved from the window. "James," he said. The Duke looked at his father. "I would like to speak with you privately." "No," the Duke said, not unkindly, not with anger, with the quiet finality of a door being closed. "Not today, father." A silence. Lord Harwick looked at his son, really looked, the way he had perhaps not looked in many years. And Eleanor, watching from the side of the room, saw something in that look that she had not expected to feel anything about. He was old. Not physically, he was vigorous, upright, still the image of a distinguished man. But in that moment he was simply old, and the thing he had built over 40 years was coming apart in front of him, and the son he had shaped so carefully was standing on the other side of it, and there was nothing left to manage. She did not feel sorry for him, but she felt, briefly and against her own intentions, the particular sadness of watching a man discover too late that control is not the same thing as love. Lord Harwick looked at her. "You did this," he said. Quiet, not accusatory, almost wondering. "No," Eleanor said. "He did. I simply gave him something his mother left for him." Lord Harwick said nothing. Then he walked to the door and opened it, and left. The room was very quiet. Mr. Carver closed his briefcase with a small professional click. "I'll have everything drafted by this evening, Your Grace." "Thank you, Carver." The solicitor left. The Duke and Eleanor stood alone in the estate office. He stood at the desk for a moment, looking down at the surface of it, the neat rows of documents, the signed papers, the pen still lying where he had set it. Then he looked up. "How are you?" he asked. Eleanor blinked. In 10 days, no one in this house, except her mother, in quiet moments in the East Corridor, had asked her that question without a purpose underneath it. "I think," she said carefully, "that I am very tired, and also, somehow, very well." He nodded slowly. "Yes, that is, yes, exactly that." They looked at each other across the desk. "Your father," Eleanor said, "what will happen?" "He will stay," the Duke said, "for now. This is still his home. I am not—" He paused. "I am not trying to punish him. I am trying to correct things. There is a difference." He said it the way she had said it to him, days ago, about other distinctions. She noticed. She thought he intended her to. "And Lady Cecilia?" Eleanor asked. "She leaves tomorrow. I spoke to her this morning." A pause. I think she was relieved, in a way. She is a sensible woman. She understood. Eleanor nodded.
"And Mrs. Briggs," the Duke said, "will be given a formal letter of thanks and a significant increase in her household salary, effective immediately." He said it plainly, without fanfare. She has earned it. Something in Eleanor's chest eased. She had not known she was still holding that. "Good," she said. They went out into the grounds after. Not riding this time, just walking, side by side, on the gravel path between the bare autumn trees. The frost was gone today, replaced by something that felt almost like the beginning of a thaw. The light was thin but present. The grounds stretched around them, quiet and wide. They walked in silence for a few minutes. Then the Duke said, "Yesterday I told you I wanted to begin again, properly. I told you to ask me on Friday." Eleanor looked at him. "It is Thursday," he said. "It is," she agreed. "I find I cannot wait until Friday." Eleanor stopped walking. He stopped beside her. They stood on the gravel path with the bare trees around them, and the manor visible in the distance, and the thin winter light coming through the branches. "Miss Ashworth," he said. "Eleanor." The first time he had used her name. He said it carefully, as though he was learning the weight of it. "I am asking you, not because of any arrangement, not because of any settlement, not because of my father or your father or anyone's expectations." He looked at her directly, with the same clarity she had seen on horseback 2 mornings ago. "I am asking you because I have watched you walk through 10 days of this house, and not once did you become less than yourself. And I think that is the rarest thing I have ever seen." Eleanor looked at him. She thought about the carriage rolling through the iron gates, the 4-seat breakfast table, the note on the floor, the ivory dress, the journal on the library shelf. She thought about her mother at the gate. "Remember who you are." She had remembered, every day, in every room. "You said," she said slowly, "that you wanted to make your own choices." "Yes." "Is this a choice?" "It is," he said. "The first one I have made, I think, in a very long time, that is entirely my own." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then yes, she said, "we can begin again." Not a grand declaration, not a performance. Just 2 people standing on a gravel path in the thin winter light, deciding something real. He offered her his arm. She took it. They walked back toward the manor together. That afternoon, Eleanor wrote 2 letters. The first to her father. "Dear Father, the debt is retired. You will receive written confirmation today from Mr. Carver, solicitor. You owe nothing to anyone in connection with the Harwick estate. New settlement terms will be discussed through proper channels in due course. I am well. I am more than well. Eleanor." The second letter she did not send anywhere. She simply wrote it for herself, the way she sometimes wrote things that needed to exist somewhere outside her own head. "I arrived through the wrong door. I was put in a servant's corridor and given an impossible document and a dress the color of erasure. I was told, in many different ways, that I did not belong here. But a woman I never met left something for her son on a library shelf, and a cook wrote 4 words on a piece of paper in the middle of the night. And a man who had been taught his whole life not to see clearly decided, finally, to see. I did not rescue anyone. I did not need rescuing. We simply told the truth, in a house that had not heard it for a very long time. That was enough." She folded the letter and put it in the wooden box beside the note from the first night. "Leave while you still can." She smiled at it, closed the box. At dinner that evening, the table was set differently. Eleanor noticed immediately. Her mother noticed. Lord Harwick, arriving last, noticed most of all. 5 chairs, but arranged differently than before, Eleanor to the Duke's right, her mother beside her, Lady Cecilia's chair removed, Lord Harwick at the far end rather than the head. The head of the table was the Duke's. No one said anything about it. Lord Harwick sat down, unfolded his napkin, looked at the table arrangement for a moment with the eyes of a man reading a document he had not been shown in advance. Then he picked up his soup spoon and said nothing. After dinner, the Duke found Eleanor in the library, her chair, the fire, the last of the evening light. He sat in the chair across from her. He did not bring a book, he simply sat. They were quiet for a while. The fire, the clock, the sound of the house settling around them in the dark. "Tomorrow," Eleanor said. "Friday," he agreed. "What happens on Friday?" He thought about it. "On Friday," he said, "I believe we have a great deal to do. Carver will return with the drafted documents. There are letters to write. He paused. "There is a great deal that has been tangled for a long time that will take time to untangle." "And your father?" A quiet pause. "My father and I have a long road," he said carefully. "I do not know where it ends, but I know that it begins with the truth, and that is further than we have ever been before." Eleanor nodded. The fire crackled. The clock ticked. "Your mother's journal," Eleanor said. "What will you do with it?" He was quiet for a moment. "Keep it," he said, "in the library, where she put it." A pause. "She said she trusted that things left in the right place find the right hands." He looked at Eleanor. She was right. Eleanor looked at the fire. She was right, she thought, about that, about him, about the library and the shelf, and the kind of son he could be if someone simply handed him the truth and waited. "She would have liked you," the Duke said quietly. Eleanor turned to look at him. "She would have recognized you," he said. "I think that is what I mean." Eleanor held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the fire. "I think," she said softly, "I would have liked her too." They sat together until the fire burned low. Neither of them moved to leave. Outside the windows, the winter night was clear and cold and very still. The grounds were dark. The fountain was frozen. The long gravel path between the bare trees was empty and silver in the moonlight. And in the library of Harwick Manor, in two chairs pulled close to the dying fire, the Duke of Blackmore and the woman who had arrived through the wrong door sat in the kind of silence that is not empty at all, the kind that is, in fact, full of everything. 6 months later, Harwick Manor smelled different. Eleanor noticed it the morning after the wedding, standing at the top of the main staircase in her dressing gown, the house quiet around her, the early summer light coming through the tall windows and landing warm and yellow on the stone floor below. Before, the manor had smelled of leather and cold, and something underneath that she had never quite been able to name, something held in, something managed. Now it smelled of beeswax and fresh flowers, and, drifting up from the kitchen, bread. Mrs. Briggs's bread. Same recipe as always, but somehow, this morning, it smelled like a different house. The wedding had been small. Eleanor had wanted that. Not from modesty, not from any sense of unworthiness, but because she had spent enough of her time at Harwick Manor, in rooms full of people performing things. She had wanted one room, a few people, and the truth. Her mother had cried. Her father, thinner than before, quieter, carrying the particular humility of a man who understands how close he came to a very different outcome, had walked her down the aisle with a grip on her arm that said everything he could not find words for. The Duke had stood at the front of the small chapel and watched her walk toward him with the expression she had come to know best on his face. Not the composed public face, not the careful managed face, the real one, the one that had appeared on a frost-covered gravel path in late autumn and had not gone away since. Lord Harwick had attended. He had sat in the second row, not the first, which was where Eleanor's mother sat. The second. He had come in quietly and sat down quietly and looked at the floor during most of the ceremony. When Eleanor had passed him on the way to the altar, she had glanced at him briefly. He had looked up. For a moment,
Just a moment. Something crossed his face that was not performance, and not calculation, and not control. Eleanor had nodded at him, slightly. He had nodded back. That was all. It was not forgiveness, exactly. It was not warmth. But it was acknowledgement. And in a house that had run for so long on careful pretense, acknowledgement felt like something. In the 6 months since Thursday, since Mr. Carver's documents and the signed papers and the walk back from the gravel path, a great deal had been untangled. The Pemberton accounts had been fully reviewed and restructured. 3 financial transfers had been quietly reversed. The estate was, for the first time in 12 years, managed entirely by the Duke's own solicitor, with transparent records and quarterly reviews. Her father's debt was gone. The written confirmation had arrived the same Thursday evening, as promised. Her father had read it 3 times, and then sat down rather suddenly in his armchair and not spoken for several minutes. When he finally looked up, he had said, to no one in particular, "I did not deserve her." Eleanor, who had not been there, heard it second-hand from her mother and thought, no, but here we are anyway. Pemberton had resigned. Lady Cecilia had returned to London and, by all accounts, was engaged to a perfectly suitable baronet who had wanted her genuinely and from the beginning, which Eleanor felt was the correct resolution for everyone involved. Lord Harwick was still at the Manor. This had been the Duke's decision, made slowly, not easily, with the kind of deliberateness that Eleanor had learned was his particular form of moral seriousness. "He is my father," he had said one evening by the library fire. "What he did was wrong. What he built was wrong. But he is 70 years old, and he has nowhere else to go. And I am not—" He had stopped, started again. "I am not my father," he had said. "That means I don't manage people. It also means I don't abandon them." Eleanor had looked at him for a long moment. "Your mother would have understood that," she had said. He had not replied, but his hand had found hers on the armrest of her chair and stayed there. Lord Harwick now occupied the West Wing. He took his meals with the household when he chose to, and in his rooms when he didn't. He walked the grounds in the mornings. He was, by degrees, a smaller figure in the house, not diminished further, but settled into a truer size, the size of a man rather than an authority. He and Eleanor spoke rarely. When they did, it was carefully, on neutral ground, in the manner of 2 people who have agreed not to revisit a battlefield while also not pretending it never existed. It was not comfortable, but it was honest. And Eleanor had decided some time ago that she preferred honest discomfort to comfortable pretense. Mrs. Briggs received her letter of formal thanks in early December, read it standing at the kitchen work table, the pastry board in front of her, Mary and the other kitchen maids tactfully occupied elsewhere. She had folded it once, put it in her apron pocket, and gone back to work. 2 days later, Eleanor had come down for her morning tea and found a small thing on the kitchen table beside her usual cup. A sprig of dried lavender, tied with a piece of kitchen string. No note. Eleanor had picked it up and held it for a moment. "Thank you, Mrs. Briggs," she had said. "I don't know what you mean, miss," Mrs. Briggs had said, her back turned, her hands in the bread. Eleanor had smiled and put the lavender in her pocket. It was in her wooden box now, beside the folded note. "Leave while you still can." She had kept both of them. She thought she always would. The Manor had changed in other ways. Eleanor had not made sweeping, dramatic alterations. That was not her nature. She had made precise ones, small ones that accumulated. The east corridor, the servants' corridor, where she had been put on the first night, was repainted, light blue. It had been dark wood paneling before, the color of an afterthought. Now it was light blue with clean white trim, and it looked, she thought, like a corridor that belonged to a house that was paying attention. The breakfast table was set for however many people were actually present. No architectural seating arrangements, no 5 chairs with one missing.
She had asked the Duke to introduce her to every member of the household staff on her first week as Duchess. Not a formal introduction, just a conversation. Name, how long they had been at the manor, what they were responsible for. The housekeeper had been faintly startled. The footman had been visibly uncertain. Mrs. Briggs had watched from the kitchen doorway with an expression that Eleanor could not quite read, but thought might have been, underneath everything, relief. She knew their names now, all of them. She used them. The Duke had watched this process with quiet attention, and then, about 3 weeks in, had started doing it himself.
The library had been reorganized. Not drastically. She had not touched the great shelves of estate records, or the history volumes, or the collected periodicals. But the south wall, the wall where she had found the dark green journal between the agricultural drainage manual and the unread sermons, had been given over entirely to things that had belonged to the Duchess. Her books, her journals, there had been 3 more, found in a trunk in the east wing. Her correspondence, which had been more substantial than Lord Harwick had ever acknowledged, with sisters and cousins and friends going back 20 years. The dark green journal was there too, in the center of the shelf, no longer hidden between neglected volumes, but given its own space, between her other journals, where it had always belonged. The Duke went to the library every morning. Sometimes Eleanor went with him. Sometimes he went alone. But every morning, without fail, he sat in the chair by the window, with a book or with the estate accounts, or sometimes with nothing at all, just the morning light and the south-facing wall, and the quiet that his mother had loved. Eleanor had not suggested this. He had simply begun doing it. She thought that was the most important thing she had seen in 6 months. On the morning after the wedding, she came downstairs and went through the kitchen and out into the kitchen garden. The summer garden was nothing like the frozen yard she had watched from her east window in November. It was green and warm and slightly overgrown. She was already thinking about what she wanted to do with the south bed, had been thinking about it since March, had 3 notebooks full of plans that the head gardener was either very enthusiastic about or very politely horrified by. She couldn't quite tell yet. She stood in the middle of the garden in her dressing gown in the early light and looked at the back of the manor, at the east wing, at the row of windows, at the particular window she had stood at so many mornings, watching the cook cross the yard. And then she walked around to the east side of the manor, to the east entrance, the servants' entrance. She stood in front of it for a moment. The door was plain, heavy wood, no ornamental stonework, none of the carved molding of the front entrance. Just a door that did what it was supposed to do. Let people in, let people out. She looked at it. She thought about the carriage rolling through the iron gates, the footman who hadn't met her eyes, the corridor that turned into a smaller corridor, that turned into a room that was perfectly adequate and said, "You are being housed, not welcomed." She thought about standing in a doorway with a note in her hand, "Leave while you still can." She put her hand on the door. It was solid under her palm, old wood worn smooth. How many people had come through this door, she thought. How many mornings, how many years. She patted it once, as you pat something that has served its purpose faithfully and deserves acknowledgement. Then she turned and walked back around to the front of the manor, up the front steps, through the front door, into the entrance hall where the morning light was coming through the tall windows and landing on the stone floor in long, warm rectangles. The butler was crossing the hall with a tray. "Good morning, Henderson," Eleanor said. "Good morning, Your Grace," he said, without the faint, uncertain emphasis that had been there in the early weeks on Your Grace, the careful stress of a man navigating a new authority he wasn't sure how to place yet. Just, "Good morning, Your Grace." Plain, easy, true. She found the Duke in the library. Of course she did. He was in his chair, the morning light on him, a cup of coffee on the side table, a letter open in his hand. Estate matters, she could tell from the formal folding. He looked up when she came in. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." She settled into her chair.
The chair across from his, the one that had been there since the beginning, that she had claimed on the first afternoon and never relinquished. He went back to his letter. She reached for the book on her side table, a novel this time, French, one she had been meaning to read since January. The fire was not lit, too warm for that now, in June. But the light was good, and the room was quiet, and from somewhere below came the smell of Mrs. Briggs's bread. They read in silence. The clock on the mantel ticked. Outside the library windows, the summer ground stretched away, green, wide, full of plans. The fountain was running. The gravel path between the trees was dappled with light. After a few minutes, the Duke set down his letter and picked up his own book. Eleanor turned a page. The house settled around them, not the tense, careful settling of a house holding its breath, but the easy settling of a house that has exhaled, that has found, finally, the shape it was supposed to have.
Later that morning, Eleanor passed the east corridor on her way to the linen room. She stopped, looked at the light blue walls, the white trim, the window at the end that had always been there, but that she had never noticed until she'd had it cleaned in February, letting in a rectangle of light that fell now across the floor in a warm, oblique angle. On the wall beside the door to what had been her room, the room she no longer slept in, the room that was now prepared for guests, proper guests, people who were welcomed rather than merely housed, there was something new. She had put it up herself 2 weeks ago, with Henderson watching in polite bewilderment. A small framed card, plain wood frame, clear handwriting. The Duchess's corridor. Not a grand plaque, not a formal dedication, just a name. Because things should have names. Because places that matter should be acknowledged. Because a woman had walked through a door that was meant to make her feel small, and had chosen every single morning to be exactly herself instead, and that deserved, at the very least, a name on a wall. Eleanor looked at the card for a moment. Then she smiled. Small, private. The smile of a woman who knows exactly where she is and exactly how she got there. She turned and walked down the corridor, head up, back straight, in no hurry at all. She had arrived through the wrong door, but she had built herself the right one. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If you're still here, we'd genuinely love to know where you're watching from. Reading your comments is one of the best parts for us. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.